Good afternoon. Welcome to the College of Continuing Education webinar, Office Politics, Getting Things Done When Not in Charge. Thank you for joining us. My name is Elena Gallagher, and I will be your moderator for today's event. If you have any questions about this webinar or other programs we offer, please feel free to contact a learner representative in the Information Center. Contact information can be found on the last slide of this presentation. There are some logistical points I would like to address before we begin. Please submit questions at any time during the webinar. The questions you submit will be addressed in the last 10 minutes of the presentation. To submit your questions, click the Q&A button in the top right-hand corner of this screen. Then type your question in the box below and click Send. We will be sending out an email in the next few days with a link to the recording of this webinar. The link will be sent to the email address you submitted during your registration. Office politics isn't a dirty word, and it isn't just about sucking up. Office politics is about gaining visibility and improving your relationships to help you be successful on the job. If you don't participate in the political game, you risk not having a say in what happens and allowing people with less experience, skill, or knowledge to influence the decisions being made around you. Your personal successes, and often your work satisfaction, depend on your ability to collaborate with team members even when their goals may be different than your own. In today's webinar, we will be discussing ways to become more comfortable with the realities of office politics and how to avoid committing political suicide. We will also highlight how to identify power in the workplace and establish who has it and how you can gain it. Finally, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Nan Gesche. She is a consultant and trainer who guides organizations and individuals through transition while focusing on their strategic goals. Her independent consulting projects include working with diverse organizations on projects such as strategic planning, strategic learning, and transition management, as well as working with individuals on career coaching. Nan is currently an adjunct instructor at the University of Minnesota, teaching small group communications. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from the University of North Dakota and received her Master of Arts in Organizational Communications. She also received her professional certificate in training and development from the University of Minnesota. Without further ado, I give you Nan Gesche.
Thank you. And thank all of you for participating today. So if we were here live, I'd ask you, in person, so why are you here? Why do you care about this? And I'm guessing some of you signed up for this for multiple different reasons. One of it is a lot of our organizations have gone to a flatter management structure, and sometimes we've even outsourced some departments or certain functions, and so we end up having to work through others outside the organization as well as peers inside of our organization. Sometimes we're asked to lead an activity or an initiative with people from other parts of the organization, which we have no formal authority. Sometimes you're just on the front line and you want to make a change. And it's difficult to do it because you just don't know how to start. And I'm guessing some of you have even dealt with issues such as trying just to figure out with people who think differently than you do or come from a different generation. And we're going to talk about some tips on how to think about to deal with some of those situations. So, organizational facts of life. Organizations are not democracies. The reality is some people just have more power than others. With that, virtually every decision happens to be somewhat subjective. It's almost impossible for people not to include their values and assumptions about situations. The reality is your boss has control over much of your life. And fairness is an impossible goal. A friend once said to me, the only thing in life that's fair is what you pay to ride the bus. It's hard to get a fair decision or what feels like a fair shake sometimes in our organizations. Now, I didn't give you this information just to frustrate you. I gave this to you to help you understand that office politics is the only game in town that you'll lose by not playing. Okay? If decisions are subjective and fairness is an impossible goal, why not share your ideas? Why not find out what are the issues of your peers and figure out how to be their voice as well as your own? Okay? The reality is most people have too many things on their to-do list every day. So how do we figure out how to get things done and how to engage others to create some momentum? So today, the hope is that we're going to get through, how do we create some comfort with the realities of office politics? We'll talk about where power actually does exist, who has it in your organizations. We'll talk about how to sharpen your political power, how you can gain it, and how to make sure your voice is heard. Okay. So, as the introduction said, office politics aren't necessarily a dirty word. We often think about it as something that is a dirty word because we've all had those experiences with somebody who did those things, the brown nosing, the sucking up, who often played up in the organization, often to the detriment of their peers and the people who were below them or worked directly with them. And so somehow or another, office politics has gotten a bad name because it wasn't done in an effective manner in the way it should be done in order to get things done in a meaningful way for a lot of people. So the reality is office politics are a way of life. I mean, you ask different leaders and like this quote says, they're going to tell you that really it's a part of life in almost every organization. What I want you to do is kind of shift some of your thinking, though, in terms of office politics, in that it's more about connecting with others for mutual benefit. How do you get what you need? How do you get what others need in order to get things done in the organization? So I'm just going to ask you some quick questions. Okay, we're going to take a quick assessment. So what I'd like you to do, hopefully you have a piece of paper or on a screen, I would like you to, on that piece of paper, write down the numbers 1 through 10 down the side of the paper because I'm going to ask you 10 questions. Okay. To the right or left of the line, I guess it doesn't matter. I'd like you to put basically 3 columns. The first column is yes, the second column is somewhat, and the third column is no. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want you to put an X under the column that best applies. So the first question, are you aware of how success is measured in your organization? So you would put an X under yes, or somewhat, or no. Second question, do you know what things are career limiting in your organization? Number 3, can you identify the key decision makers in your organization? Number 4, do you know how much risk is tolerated in your organization or even in your work group? Number 5, are you aware of the consequences for failing to perform? Some organizations you'd even have to ask, are there any? Number 6, do you know who the most influential people are in your organization? 7, have you built effective relationships with the influential people who are key to your success? 8, do you have a wide network of relationships spanning several areas of your organization? 9, have you established your credibility as a results-oriented performer? And 10, are you able to communicate persuasively by adjusting your message for a given audience? So what I'd like you to do then is to look at the number of times you answered yes, the number of times you answered somewhat, and the times you answered no. Multiply the number of yeses by 3, somewhat by 2, and no by 1. And then add your numbers. If you got a score of 26 to 30, you should be here with me giving a seminar because you know what you need to do in order to be effective. A score of 21 to 25, you've got a great start. You're on your way. A couple of things you could maybe tweak. 16 to 20, got a flicker of, office politics savvy, need to be a little bit careful about what you're doing at times. If you got a score below 16, you're in the right place. Let's talk about what we need to do to help you be more successful. So let's start out with kind of the political suicides, because this is right off the bat where things are going to go wrong and sometimes may get you stuck. And we're going to talk about these as we go through the rest of the day. And the first one is just knowing who has real power. As we all know, we've worked with people who have a title, but they don't necessarily seem to have a lot of power and influence in the organization. So we need to know the difference between power and influence. Okay? We need to know how things get done around here. What are the unwritten rules? I'm sure all of you have seen in your organizations, you have to know certain things about how to get them done. A fatal flaw is not knowing how to center yourself and not get upset in a conflict situation. Okay? Also try and watch that entitled attitude. If you've been around for a while, if you've got some expertise, sometimes we make some assumptions that we have the right to things without doing what we need to do to get the connections to make things happen. The reality is, wouldn't hurt to take a class on change. We offer those here at the university through the College of Continuing Ed, and knowing how to manage change can help you be so much more productive with office politics. You have to understand your personal power, which we'll talk about. We have to know how to control our emotions. We also offer classes at the university in mindful-based stress reduction. Learning how to manage anger is critical, and that ties so closely with conflict management. Again, we have courses for that as well as problem solving. I often say learning to manage problems effectively will reduce conflict, and doing that creates a lot of credibility on the office politics front. Okay, hopefully you understand why you need to care about office politics and have a little bit of a different mental model about why we use it and why it's important to engage in. So, next step. Who really has power in your organizations? It's thinking about who has the power, because in the reality, power is an illusion. Okay? As I said before, there are a lot of people who have titles who don't seem to be able to get the kind of results we hope to. Okay? One of the things I will often say is there are people who make things happen and there are people who let things happen. And part of the goal of learning to deal with office politics is learning how to make things happen. And a lot of us have worked with people who have titles who aren't very good at making things happen. So what I want you to think about is, how do you remap your org chart? Who are those people who get things done who don't necessarily have a title? Who are the people who seem to be able to shake things up, even if they don't potentially have don't have the title or the authority to do something? Okay. You may know, looking at the org chart, not all vice presidents, presidents, directors are created equal. We get the sense that some people have a whole lot more influence and power than others. So what you need to do is identify, who are they? You also need to think, who are the people in your organizations who don't necessarily have a title? Okay? How is it that they get things done when they don't have the title or the resources? Okay? And we're going to talk about how that happens, but I think what is helpful is to first just step back and look at how power is distributed in your organization. Think about, what is it that those people do differently than the other people? Okay? Because that'll help you understand the power dynamics specific to your organization or your work group or your location, by understanding who are the people that are respected, who are the people that others want to use as their coach or their mentor, who are the brains sometimes behind the organization. So thinking about power, a lot of times when I work with individuals, they make the assumption that, I'm in an entry-level position, or I'm new to the organization. How can I have any power? Well, you need to think of power in a very different perspective. Yes, there are people who have positional power. It is your supervisor, it is your director. When you're growing up, it's your parents. They have the right to make decisions for you. Then there's resource power. Who are the people who have the resources to help you get your job done? Often in an organization, I often say those IT people have power. If you're having technical problems and you don't have a friend in IT, don't have good connections, sometimes your life can be a little bit more difficult. Maybe your department isn't the first to get the new laptops. Whatever it is that goes on in your organization, they can't hire, fire you, give you a promotion, but they've got resource power. But there's another kind of power that we own and can bring to the table anytime, no matter our position, our title, our length of service in the organization. And it's our personal power. It's our personal characteristics. Your passion for what you do, it's your interpersonal skills, it's the knowledge of your job, it's the credibility, which we're going to talk a lot about because your reputation is key, and as well as your networks, and we're going to speak to that topic as well. So let's think about what is your perceived power. We just talked a little bit about identifying who has power, not looking at it just at the org chart, but if you were to pick who gets things done in your organization, where would you land on that chart? Where would you be? Do you have people that look to you as someone who gets things done? Or do they look to you as somebody who's just more of a follower, who lets things happen? Okay. So one of the things we need to understand is, we need to know what the current reality is in our organization, how we are perceived as well as how other people are perceived. And so when you think about it, how would your boss describe you? When you're thinking about your perceived power, would your boss describe you as somebody helpful, cooperative, somebody who took initiative, somebody who is willing to take a risk in order to accomplish an organizational goal over maybe your own? What about your colleagues, your coworkers? What do they say about you? Do they think that you're open to listening to things from their perspective? Are you willing to share information? Are you willing to help them be successful at achieving their goals? Or is it always about your goals and what's important to you? So when you think about that, maybe even the people who work underneath you, do they see you as respectful? Are you willing to listen? Do you set an example of how to share power and sometimes how to get things done? So now let's talk about how do you make this happen? You know where you are in the org chart. You know who the influencers are. Maybe you need to make some friends with some of those influencers. Make sure you're monitoring, watching them, getting comfortable with how they do things. But the three most important things you need to do to shape your influence and power is this. Focus on your performance, work on your partnerships, and manage perceptions. And so let's talk more about each of these. This is kind of a no-brainer. Most of you know this. Our performance impacts our personal power. The individuals who are some of the top performers in your work group, your department, your location, are the individuals who tend to have more influence, okay? Because they are respected for the quality of the work they do. You're somebody who others can count on, okay? It isn't just about the work that you do, though. Sometimes it's you're an individual who looks for opportunities to shine. And how you do this then is understanding what are your strengths, okay? What are the things you can do that nobody else can do? Or maybe what is it you can do that nobody else wants to do? I remember there was a time in an organization, I used to be a bank regulator, and during that time, we were implementing all these teams, and not many of the individuals really wanted to be a team leader or a team facilitator. So raised my hand, volunteered, stuck my neck out to do something nobody else wanted to do, and lo and behold, it was something that played to my strengths, gave me visibility in the organization, and actually was easier for me than some of the other things that I was doing. So are you willing to step out of the box and look beyond just what your job responsibilities are? And are you willing to do things without being asked? Are you willing to tackle an issue that might feel uncomfortable? And sometimes it means just tackling an issue for somebody else that maybe they've complained about that seems like a small issue, that it's not big enough and important enough, but you take care of the small issue, and then people come in and are shocked, amazed, so grateful, thankful that you took care of this small issue. There's a great scene in the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro. There's a huge desk piled with junk, and he basically takes care of it. And everyone's like, wow, gave him instant credibility. Small things sometimes can make a big difference because it creates recognition. It creates that visibility, okay, that you're there, that you are producing, that you are doing something. And so sometimes those small things give you more credit than you would recognize. The other thing is with this building visibility is you have to recognize that you have to find opportunities to share what you do. Nobody's going to probably go out of their way to share your achievements if you don't. Your supervisor knows what you do. They do your performance evaluations. Doesn't mean it gets much beyond that. So find some opportunities, whether it's during your performance reviews, if there's opportunities in your company or department newsletters, find a way to share some of your accomplishments or the activities you're engaging above and beyond your job responsibilities. And understand that, some of this doesn't happen overnight. The opportunity has to present itself. And you'll just kind of know when the time is right if you understand what your, strengths are and where you sometimes do shine. The second one is really establishing partnerships. And I'd say this is probably one of the most critical components. The performance piece you understand, it's fairly straightforward. The partnerships is something a lot of us maybe need to work on. One of the first partnerships we need to build and work on is working with and managing your boss, okay? The reality is, number one, don't expect them to be perfect. They're human, okay? Leading organizations and leading a bunch of people is one of the most difficult jobs there is, okay? Your job, though, is to study their style and figure out what makes them tick, what works, how they prefer to communicate, how they prefer to interact with each other, It's also helpful to give them a compliment. Notice what they do right, okay? And compliment them for that. Who doesn't want a compliment now and then, okay? Set the example, especially if they haven't given you one for a while. Maybe if you give them one, they might find it in their heart to share as well, okay? So when you think about this, also don't forget that it's your boss's boss who often protects your job. Many times it's not your boss who fires you, it's your boss's boss. And so, managing up isn't just one level up. Oftentimes it's 2 levels up, and you need to think about that, okay? Now, when we're talking about this, I think it's really important to be other-oriented. Part of your job is to make sure that your boss looks good. It's also understanding how do you help your team members at your location, your department, different things like that. And so you have to find where your goals and the business or the people in your department, where your goals intersect, okay? Because if you're always just asking for help or pushing for something that it's only related to what you want, you're going to be given a reputation that it's more about me than what's good for the whole department, the organization, or the work group, okay? And that can be difficult sometimes, but we need to figure out how kind of to be other-oriented. And so we have to put our listening hats on and hear what the issues are in the department. What are other people complaining about? Find the mutual hurts, okay? What's irritating, frustrating other people, because they are the individuals who can help you. They're the individuals who can support you, especially if you do need to take a message to management, senior management. It's nice to know you got somebody who's at your back, okay? So you need to figure out when you're these partnerships, it's creating partnerships with your team members to figure out, I often use the language, what there is, what's their facts, what's their position, what are their intentions, so there's where we think, there's where they think, and where do we find that connection? And so sometimes it helps to map it out and think about how do you find that common goal that you can all share. One way to do this is to make sure you've got some networks in your organization. okay? And outside your organization. So there's different ways to look at this, okay? I like to think of networks as three things, three different types of networks, I should say. The first one is operational. And that operational network is, who are the people in my organization, maybe in different departments, different locations, even outside the organization, okay, who understand what I do or have done what I'm doing, who that if I'm having difficulties, I can go to. You should have a list of those individuals. These are the people that you can tap into as a resource to help build your credibility and improve your performance. Okay? The other one is your personal networks. This is the easy one. This is your support system. You've had a bad day at work, you know, these are the people who speak to you, listen to you, let you vent, give you ideas about what you should do differently. The third one is the one we often forget that's really important if we want to create personal power and improve our office politics in an organization, and that's what I refer to as your strategic network. Okay? Your strategic network is, how do you get to the next job? How do you advance your department to the next opportunity? Okay? Who are the people, again, who have been there, but who are the people who have already made it to the next step? People who have moved on to a different position, who have a different perspective. Okay? So we don't want a network just to do the job we're in today. We want a network that's going to build and help us see where our next step is for ourselves as an individual, as well as our department. So when you're making these connections, okay, it's important to think that it's both internal and external, up, down, and across. Okay. It's interesting, when I used to be a bank regulator, we would go into the banks, and it was interesting because the banks who called us on a regular basis to talk about the new regulations, the new problems, how do you think those relationships went when we went into the organizations? They were always much better when they had reached out to the external to find some resources to help them. We think of internal when it comes to our strategic and our operational. Got to think external sometimes. It was actually really interesting. I had a supervisor once who basically told me, Nan, you need to belong to 3 professional organizations, and you need to go to at least 1 meeting quarterly for one of those professional organizations. I thought, she's crazy. Who has time to do this? Okay. The reality, it was some of the best advice she had ever given me. Okay. It was really helpful to belong to those professional organizations. Why? Okay. I met a lot of really smart people who were going through or had been through some of the issues that I was facing in my organization. They were resources that I could tap in to help me learn and understand and give me a different perspective of what was going on. Okay? They were really important to my education process. So it turned out to be some of the best advice I'd ever gotten. As I said earlier, we need to manage up. We need to understand what our supervisors' priorities and goals are. We need to understand how they prefer to work. And we need to manage down. What are the needs of the people who work for us? Okay? What are the needs of the people who work across from us? And so thinking about making connections at every level, because they have eyes and ears that give us a different perspective that help us find that common goal and connection. Okay? Now, networking can be difficult, okay? It can be a difficult thing to do, okay? So a couple of tips here on how to do that. Obviously, the reason that supervisor told me to both go to these networking organizations or go to these networking events is that you're going to be more effective dealing with people face-to-face. Building networks is really important to do face-to-face. Okay? Help people understand what you're doing, ask questions, get their input, hear what they need so that you can figure out how to help them. Okay? A big part of this making connections isn't always just to get the information and the help you need, but it's also to give back. You have to be able to share with them. It's what I would often refer to as managing reciprocity. How do you give back to them? But it's also thinking about, how do you be a connector? Okay? I've watched individuals in organizations who maybe don't necessarily show up as the expert, but they always know somebody who is the expert. They know who to call. They know where the resources are. So something to think about. It doesn't mean that you always have to have the answer to everything, but it might not hurt to have some names in your back pocket. So another reason to network outside. What I talk about here as well, though, is understanding that, make sure that it's done in the open, that it's not secretive, it's not back room. Okay? You have to do this in the open. You have to be really transparent. I think the only issue that I say when I use the back door, what I mean by that on this slide is that you're asking someone to make an introduction to somebody else. And so you're never making a blind connection with somebody when you're networking. You can always say, oh, I emailed my friend Nick, and Nick said that you might be willing to speak to me. That's the back door. Nick opened the door for you. He made the connection. Okay. So it's important that when you're networking, use all the connections that you have. Now, as I say on this slide, networking is work, and you just have to do it, okay? It's really important that you just figure out how to do it. Even if it's only 10 minutes a week, you have to start documenting who's my network, okay? When was the last time I checked in? What can I do for them? Okay, who are the people with power? When was the last time I had lunch with them? Okay, maybe stop by their office to figure out what's going on in the organization. You have to put it on the schedule, and you have to work the system. You need to think about that. And it can be very difficult to do because I know most of you have more to do than you want. Okay? We're all very busy, but the reality is sometimes we're going to find an answer or the help we need that is going to make us more productive and more efficient further down the road. It just might not be obvious at the time. So find a way to build it into your schedule and practice it. Just do it like it says. Okay. Perceptions. Okay. Oh, one last thought that I didn't say on that back door is make sure, and I think that was one of the things with the professional associations, also join and interact with people who are in completely different professions. Okay. You need to get outside of your comfort zone. It's interesting that sometimes being outside of your comfort zone and working with people who have different backgrounds give you different perspectives. They help you see things from a completely different way than you've ever seen it before. And you might not have done that if you'd always spent time just working with people, who do the exact same thing that you do. Okay, so we've talked about your performance. We've talked about partnerships. We're going to talk now about perceptions. And this will build on some of the concepts we've already talked about. And we'll build on, because they aren't separate. They really do have a lot of interconnectedness because building those partnerships has a lot to do with the perceptions of how you treat people and how other people see you. And I already mentioned then that you need to be other-oriented. You need to be able to focus on what's important to other people. So it's understanding how you, again, are going to help them. Okay? It isn't just about them always helping you, but how are you going to help them get the results they want? Okay? How can you make things easier for them to help you? Okay? And we'll talk specifically about maybe how you do that as it relates even to how you communicate and interact with other individuals. The other component of that is self-management. And again, this is huge. This is a huge piece about being able to manage problem solving and decision making, being able to manage conflict, being able to center ourselves to really listen to what's going on. You can't be other-oriented if you can't calm yourself down to hear what other people are saying. And by doing these things, you're going to build trust. And trust is one of the key components to being really effective when you are working with other people. Sometimes, when you think about it, who do you trust and who don't you trust? are you going to give your power away or want to negotiate with people that you don't trust? Okay? And when you think about the people you do trust, who are they? Your parents, your friends, okay? Who are the people you don't trust? Well, maybe shouldn't ask this during a political season, because right now, I think it's really hard listening to all the ads. But when you compare the difference between the people you trust and the people you don't trust, one of the biggest differences between the two are the people you trust are the people who are other-oriented. They are the people who look out for you and your best interest. They aren't just looking out for their own best interest. And so how do you create that perception that you are other-oriented to build the trust that you need to build? So, self-management. This is a hard thing, okay? When it comes to self-management, we need to be able to step back and observe really what are true motives. When we are playing the office politics game, do we do that self-check and say, is this just about me? Or do I have other people's interests in mind? Am I really thinking about what's important to other people? Okay. It's about that self-control. Can you put on your brakes and rein in your impulse? When you're sitting through a meeting and you want to say something, probably needs to be said, but not sure how to say it in an effective manner. Can you have the control not just to blurt out what you want to say in a less than productive manner? And it's really thinking about what's the behavior then that do you want to demonstrate? Are you gossiping? Are you being negative? Or are you being the person who is that problem solver? Okay. Do you choose to be positive? Do you choose to be assertive versus passive aggressive? And this is what part of the self-management is. It's learning to slow down. It's learning to breathe. It's understanding your own responses. Okay. You want to show that you're focused and centered even when you're working with people who can annoy you, because these are the people that we are more likely to trust and want to interact with. That's part of being, part of engaging our office politics is being somebody that's easier to deal with. And so part of that has to do with being adaptable. How resilient are you? How adapting of your style? Okay. Do you make things easy for other people to work with you? Okay. When you think about it, do you make it easy for people to partner with you when you do want your help, or do you expect them to do things the way you want them done? Okay. So if you want somebody to help you with something, to get a message or an idea out, do you just drop it on their plate, or do you sit down and spend some time brainstorming with them? Do you give them a couple of leads or a couple of drafts of how they might start the thought process of doing something for you? Or do you just tell them what needs to be done and disappear? Okay. The reality is you need to figure out how to be adaptable. And we're going to talk more about this specifically in how you communicate, because we need to be able to adapt our communication style specifically to how other people communicate. Just take a second and read this. Okay. If you didn't get a chance to read it, hopefully when you get the materials, you can finish reading. It is a great letter. How do you show up every day to the people who empty your garbage, for the people who, sometimes you work with that you don't see very often, that you're not sure how they fit into your network because they maybe can't help you strategically? This is where office politics gets the bad name, because we've seen those brown nosers who suck up and treat people above them differently than the people below them. Okay? It's about showing up the same way every day for everyone that kind of creates that, sense that perception of really having some self-control and being other-oriented and somebody that you can really trust. And so really knowing and reflecting on how do you treat everyone else. Number 4, how do you make sure that your ideas get heard? This sometimes can be tricky, and this is really a skill. Networking is a skill that you need to practice, but the words you choose and how you communicate have an incredible impact on your office politics. First and foremost, you need to understand what your goals and your values are. Really, what are the things that are important to you? So what are the things you really are willing to stick your neck out on, and which are the things that you're not? Okay? Because the reality is, if it's not that important to you, you're not going to have the energy or the passion in order to follow through on whatever those issues are, even if they are important to everyone else. We're going to have more energy around the issues that are important to us as well. Okay? How do we motivate and empower others? We've discussed some of this, when we were talking about networking. One of the most critical things is practicing effective communications. Okay? I'm not going to give you a course on how to listen, but listening is one of the most important things that you need to do in your communication arsenal to be effective when you are trying to be politically correct, or build office politics. How are you ever going to find that shared goal, what's good for you, what's good for the organization, or you and your department, if you aren't listening to what other people are saying? So the reality is sometimes we need to zip it. Okay. We need to just be present to hear what other people are saying. Or we need to ask really good questions and slow down and really let people answer from their perspective. We shouldn't listen to get our responses in. We need to listen to figure out where their perspectives are. It's kind of what I call that kind of beginner's mindset. When somebody's talking to you, are you writing a script of what you want to ask, or is the bubble blank above your head because you're truly listening to what they say and are taking in what they're speaking to? So a lot of times, effective communications, part of listening is learning to ask really good questions. I commented, I use the language, what's there, what's important to them right now, where are they at? Learn to ask people questions like, what are you hoping will come out of this new project? What do you see as the barriers to what's going on? And then write some of this stuff down, keep notes, and figure out where the links are to figure out where your support is. Okay? Figure out what the ideas are that other people are interested in. By listening, you'll also figure out where some of the gray is. Instead of thinking in terms of just black and white, you can identify where the gray is sometimes on topics. And it's also going to help you figure out, as I said, other people's perspectives. We can't understand people's perspectives without listening. And this is where taking a problem-solving and decision-making course and a course on conflict management is so critical, because if we really can't hear what people are saying, we can't problem solve. I was working with an individual one time that basically, he said, Nan, 1 + 1 is always 2. And it's like, yeah, but what happens if somebody says it's 3? Are you just done? You have to hear that in their mind it's 3, so how do you bridge the gap? And you're not going to do that unless you're really listening to what's going on. Okay, we're going to talk more about how to speak up and how to be transparent. I've mentioned the conflict before, and then we're going to talk a little bit about leveraging and just the general respect for other people's time. So, office politics. Sometimes it's just about having the courage to speak up. When you're in a meeting and nobody else is willing to say anything, are you willing to have the courage to say something? I often told my kids, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So what's the worst thing that can happen if you do ask? You might get what you want. You may not get everything you want, but you might get something that you want or some part of it. And so it's important to speak up for what you want. The other thing is when you're speaking up, again, remember that your best argument is an argument that supports other people's needs and it addresses the issues of the people you're trying to persuade. So if you understand what your boss needs and what's important to them, then it gets a whole lot easier to interact with them. Okay? So part of speaking up is just having an open, honest conversation, but it does mean sometimes getting out of your comfort zone. Okay? Identifying what the problems are and just asking a question. If you don't know what you want to say, I would just say always ask a question. Okay? And understand that when you're asking it, it's not about being spiteful or malice. It really is that you want to understand what's going on and solve a problem. And because people can tell the difference. Okay? People know when you're speaking up, is it about what's important to you? Is it because you're complaining, or is it because you want to understand the situation and how to solve it? Okay. One of the things we need to do is understand, and I mentioned this in the slide earlier, is that maybe we need to control the vision but not the process. That in office politics, when we're using our networks, when we are asking for help, sometimes in accomplishing goals, you have to be clear about the outcomes and focus on what the outcomes are that you want to achieve. Okay? It isn't just about how you do it. Okay? So it's not about micromanaging people. It's about finding people who are effective at what you want to accomplish and let them run with it. Let them do it in a way that's meaningful to them, but you have to be clear about what your outcomes are. So find an agreement around that. Agree to what the goals and the outcomes are that you both agree to. Okay? Give them the freedom to be creative. Then it comes down to, is our language powerful language, or do we have language that allows people to walk all over us? On this slide, basically what I've got some examples of what I call powerful or powerless language or conversational politics. Okay? Sometimes we give our personal power away because of the language we use. We can be seen as doormats, as being somebody who isn't willing to stand up or ask tough questions. And so do you have the courage to stand up for your position and meet the level of the interaction that people are giving you? Okay? This is something you can read. It's just an example in a class. We would work through some of these scenarios where you could actually practice difficult issues or conversations or problems that you're dealing with, and then we would script out what would be some one-up or one-down type of conversations. So it is just an example to look at. One of the things I did just want to comment on the conversational politics is make sure you understand the conversational style and the communication styles of other people that you work with. You know, a lot of times, especially nowadays with all the technology differences, some of you may think, you know, email is a thing of the past, but if you're working with somebody that you want to influence, you need to use the communication channels and their preferred methods of interacting. So if they prefer email and you prefer text, do what they prefer. Okay, so that's one of the things with conversational politics. Figure out how do you also even just get on their schedule to get their attention. It was interesting. One individual that I worked with sometimes didn't get all their emails read, and so learned that that wasn't the best way to have a conversation with the individual. What I learned is that their support staff actually had a lot of power influence over their schedule and the emails that they did read. And so part of office politics was understanding that this goes back to maybe a little bit managing up, but know who the people are that surround them. In the example I was just talking about, if I had an issue that I wasn't sure how to get to or get the attention of my supervisor, I would have a conversation with his support staff to figure out, is this an issue? Isn't it? When would be a good time to slide it in? How would it be a good time to slide it in? And they would help me kind of traverse this conversational politics of how and when and where is the best way to do this. So look for people who can help you. Conflict. Take a course. We could spend days on this. So these are just some slides that you want to refer to and think about to help you be effective. We don't have time to get into it at this point. The most important thing here, though, is to understand when it comes to office politics, facts can be wrong and opinions are just simply different. And when you start to label people and their decisions and ideas as wrong, it's often inaccurate and very politically detrimental. And so really watch out for that. I think at this point there are a few slides on how to leverage. They're pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to, I think, leave those for you to read. I think I would rather spend the little bit of time that we have left opening up the floor for Q&A. So basically what leverage this is just talking about is that we need to understand when we do and don't have leverage in certain situations. Because when we have more leverage, it makes it easier for us to speak up and sometimes to challenge the status quo or to ask questions of other people. And so we need to understand if we have it or not. And so you can read this at a later time. I think it will, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. If not, my email address is at the end of the presentation. You can shoot me some emails or ask me a question as we shift to that portion of the presentation. So the reality is you can lead from everywhere, anywhere, if you know how to build networks, if you can identify goals and interact easily with other people, figure out how to deal with conflict. The reality is you just have to believe in yourself. You've got something to contribute, and it's just finding your voice and how to do it. A lot of times we give our power away because we just think we're too new, too young, too inexperienced. We just don't know. We're not the expert. We've all got something to contribute, and you just need to find your voice and figuring out how to do it. So hopefully some of these tips will help you do that. At this point, thank you, and I'd like to open up the floor for some questions.
All right, well, thank you, Nan. We did actually get a number of questions in. So the first one, how would you deal if a senior key decision maker exercises more of his positional power than his rationality, which often affects the result-oriented power in you?
Well, this is why I started the whole conversation, that organizations are democracy, and your boss does have more power. I think it's important with office politics to understand that sometimes our supervisors are conveying a message that they don't always even agree with. And so they will use their authority, their legitimate power, because they don't know how to use their personal power and influence because they may not completely support the issue at hand. And so occasionally you may need to go higher up in the organization to really understand what the situation is, what the business case is, why we're doing things. Because there's probably something else going on. And I think what's important to understand is that every level of the organization, we have a different picture of the issue. And so what might not seem strategic or logical or practical or rational to us may seem completely rational at a different level of the organization. And so that's where you need to use your personal power in the office politics to ask some questions to understand their perspective and where it's coming from. And that might also give you a lead-in or an opportunity to talk about what they might have missed.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question, do you have any tips for how to work with individuals you don't trust or respect?
Ooh, this is a hard one. The reality is we don't like everyone and not everyone likes us. That's just the cold, hard truth about life. But we need to respect them and understand that they're there for a reason. They've got some experiences, some skills, some perspectives that the organization values that they've brought in. And the reality is we don't have to be best friends with everyone we work with, but we have to respect the knowledge and experiences that they bring and figure out how to leverage them and work in a manner that's productive. Doesn't mean you have to go to lunch and be friends.
Perfect. What recommendations do you have to manage your frustration from interacting with others who do not practice good listening skills?
Yeah, the only one we can ever change is ourselves. This is a really difficult thing to do. And part of it is learning to ask good questions of them, okay, to get them to maybe see things sometimes from a different perspective. I know sometimes when I teach classes, we do an activity called strategic dialoguing. So you're going to need to come to a class, because this is not something that can easily be answered in a short answer, because it's a skill that takes time. And if people really just aren't listening, maybe they're not the people you need to be spending a lot of time having conversations with.
Thank you. So I consider myself adaptable, but my boss is a workaholic. How can I keep a can-do attitude when I need to also put up boundaries?
Well, I think the can-do attitude is about having a conversation about putting up boundaries. We have the right to create boundaries at any level of the organization. You know, if your supervisor drops something on you at 5:15 and they know you have to catch the bus at 5, it's in everyone's best interest for you to have a conversation and say, hey, let's just talk about what happened yesterday. I want to give you the best product possible, but when it drops on my desk at 15 minutes before I leave, I don't have time to develop a quality product for you and finish the other work I need to get done. Can we negotiate that, I need at least a half an hour? Okay, or because I want to be successful, so you're successful. And so it's understanding how to couch the conversation that it's about helping both of you be successful and being clear about what you need to make that happen.
Perfect. So how do you balance being adaptable to others with the exception that others will be helpful for you too? For example, when can you say people need to meet your timeline and deadlines versus following a timeline that is convenient for them?
It's a negotiated process, to a certain extent. And that's what I often say. When I work with groups, one of the biggest things that causes conflicts is just our work style differences and our expectations around work. So we have to be clear about the deadlines, but oftentimes we have to negotiate them. There's what we want and what works best for us, and there's something that works for somebody else. Some of us are the type that we have our project done, 3 days before it's due, and they're the people who are wrapping it up the second before it needs to be done. How do you find that middle ground to honor the differences in how you work? And part of that is just letting people know. I get stressed out when the work isn't done till the last minute, or I lose my creative edge when I'm forced to do things too far in advance. And so letting people know what you need and how you feel about the situation, and try and think about how can you find that middle ground that you both get what you need.
Great. So we only have time for one more question. How do you start a conversation to ask for information from individuals close to retirement in your company?
Oh, so you want to tap into their expertise and experience. Oh, always a great opportunity. It's if somebody's getting ready to retire, it's like, I haven't had a chance to spend as much time working with you as I might like to. Can I take you to lunch or get you a coffee? Because I want to learn about what it took to be successful, or what you've learned in your years working at this organization that might help me be more successful. So it's okay to say that, and basically tell them that you appreciate the value and the hard work that they've given. They've seen some things, they know what it takes, and show the appreciation by buying them a cup of coffee or some lunch and hear their story. So with that, thank you very much for attending. And as stated earlier, you'll get some information, follow-up information with the link to the webinar. And for your learning pleasure, here are some additional upcoming courses that you can participate in.
Thank you, Nan. We really appreciate your presentation and you joining us today. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to the Information Center through the contact information found on this last slide. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks.